So today we'll discuss, we have a Shiloh which has been putting on, and Mr. Samuel started to the fence at that, because sometimes sometimes has it on even a little time after actual Shkia Sakamo, the sun setting, when the time reaches sunset.
What is the actual time that you can go to?
That's what we're going to learn right now. The tells us like this, in the Orachaim and Siman Lamed, that's the 30th chapter, Man HaNochosam, the time that you can put on tefillin, and on the second section, the second paragraph says, also it's prohibited to put on tefillin in the nighttime, Shemi Yishkom, perhaps you might forget that you have them on, Yoshin Boham, and you'll sleep with them. If you put them on before the sun set, and it became dark, there are people, even if they are on him all the night, mutter, it's permissible, main morin came, but we don't teach it that way. The iglo cholat feeling, if he didn't take off his feeling when the sun set, because he had no place to watch it, and needs to love, and he kept him on him in order to watch him, mutter, it's permissible, morin came, we can teach that to be so. You should understand like this. The Balei HaTesvos and the Rosh, like Rabbi Akiva, because Ashi, who was the last of the Amoraim, who set up more in the way we have today, he was the last of them. The law is like Rav Ashi, Pascha Akiva, who says in the Gemara that, I know this sounds strange, that nighttime is also a time for putting on tefillin.
But you just said that it wasn't.
I know. The halacha is, we take in consideration, the Ram disagrees, he feels that it's not the proper time. So the Aruch HaShulchan tells us that as far as the Torah law is concerned, nighttime is also a time for putting on tefillin. But the Rabbanan made a decree against it so that we shouldn't put it on at nighttime. Now, question: at the time he put it on, whether or not it's permissible. So we say he put it during Mitzvah.
Not during tomorrow.
No. It says like this: the Bir HaHocha in the Mishnah Brura says like this. Explanation of if he does not take off his tefillin when the sun sets, we're talking about that case. So Omar, what are we talking about when the sun sets? The Marshkia, we're talking about the end of the setting of the sun. The Hu Teisek Kochavi, that is the going out of the stars. In other words, according to the Mishnah Brura, you have all the way up to the time when the stars appear. And that means on Teisek Kochavi is the time you would wait before you would daven be Shabbos, going out from Shabbos. So, therefore, under no circumstances have we ever had his tefillin on that late. So there was never any shaila that he was permitted to put on the tefillin even at that late time. If he hadn't put them on sooner, of course. Obviously, the proper time to put on tefillin is when in the morning. But if you missed for some reason, like on Tishri we have them, we don't put on tefillin in the morning, so we do it in the afternoon. And we do it every year. It's not just one person. The whole Klal Yisrael does it.
And then it brings up another question to me, in that if even though you're saying that it's okay that he does.
No, I haven't finished it. I haven't finished it. Here, yeah.
But then, if there's someone in the synagogue that is like objectionable to it, doesn't that subtract from it then that you can't?
There is no reason to object for somebody to something that's permissible according to the law. Why should a person object to a person putting on tefillin? I've never heard of such a thing in my life. I can understand you can object to a person doing an aveira, but putting on tefillin is no objection if it's within the time that's permitted. There's no reason why a person should object. If some people are not accustomed to seeing tefillin put on in the afternoon, they should know that the law permits them to do it. Simple as that. And just because you're not accustomed to it, what's the... All right, let's go for I'll read you the variable law. He wants to say, if you haven't taken off the tefillin, you haven't taken off tefillin when the sun sets, He wants to say that means the end of the setting of the sun, that means the going out of the stars. Then it's the time from taking off the tefillin as far as the law is concerned. Because if it was during twilight, even if he had a place to watch it, he does not have to take it out. And this appears in the Gemara in Menachos, Daf Amud Beis. Even according to the authority that says night is not the time for putting on tefillin, he admits that's okay. So even the authority that holds that night is not the time for putting on tefillin, he permits you to keep on the tefillin all the way up to Tzeitzek HaChavim. In other words, if a person puts on tefillin on mincha, as long as he takes it off before the stars come out, which is the time that we would daven ordinarily Mitzui Shabbos, going on with Shabbos, not on during the weekdays, that's a long time afterwards, he's perfectly all right. There's no law that says he has to take, he does. And Koshikein, certainly, when done according to us, that we poskin that as far as the strict Torah law is concerned, even if you had tefillin on at night, it would still be all right, although the first thing is you're supposed to it.
Would it be considered a sin after the stars went out?
And the Lahush and the Prima Godding said that we poskin like that in the first instance. What? Ordinarily, were you supposed to come here? We're going to discuss...
Everybody didn't come.
You didn't come. I expected you to come.
Sick.
Oh, I'm sorry. How do you feel? A little better?
No.
Oh, please, don't be that.
The nature of the beast.
Oh, I wish you well.
Thank you.
Anyway, all right, so you understand? So we discussed it here. So the halakha is quite like this. Okay, so Mr. Samuel should not have gotten that excited. No, I understand he didn't want you to daven in an improper time.
He didn't want me to
But the
say
verse specifically, according to all authority, it's perfectly legitimate. If he puts on tefillin, if he didn't put it on before that, then obviously the best time to put on tefillin. But for some reason, for instance, sometimes you don't have your tefillin available. That happens. Or sometimes you're sick. You can't get up in the morning. There's other reasons. You don't have the tefillin. So you put on tefillin at night and at mincha time. And you can keep it on until, well, as long as it has not come Tzeitzek HaChavim. Okay? I just wanted to clarify that before we discussed anything further. Now, today we're discussing about Sedra.
Maybe this gentleman has some questions.
Or did you want to discuss anything there? I can discuss whatever you want to discuss. If you have any difficulty. No, we have, you must understand something. Every passage, every pasuk, what we call the Old Testament, is not to be interpreted necessarily literally. The Talmud and the Talmudic literature explain what every passage means. In other words, if we want to know what it means, we have to go to the Torah Shebaal Peh, which we call the oral Torah, which is now, of course, written down too, in Talmudic literature, and that explains what everything means. Yes, of course.
Is a tenet of Jewish belief that man is fallible or infallible?
Oh boy, you got to go tell me what you mean in simpler English. What do you mean by fallible?
Makes mistakes.
That man makes mistakes? Man is capable of making mistakes, yes.
Not capable. That's
He has the potential of making mistakes.
but he doesn't.
Well, I didn't say he doesn't. Most people do make mistakes.
It's like this I do and no I don't.
No, I don't quite understand what you're saying.
Well,
are you
like-
trying to say that nobody makes mistakes?
No, I'm trying to ask as
As
a
Judaism?
tenet of the faith,
Yeah.
is it a belief that man makes mistakes? Or is that man does not make mistakes?
Well,
Either he does or no.
It isn't that isn't the thing. It is a belief that most people make mistakes.
But there are some who do not.
There are very few that don't.
How do we distinguish who those people are?
Very simple. And that enumerates 4 people that did not make mistakes. But that obviously there were more than 4 people that lived. And And so most of us do make mistakes, unfortunately.
Only those four people.
And those are the only ones enumerated in the Talmud, other than perhaps
Well,
others.
let's distinguish, for example, you as a teacher, or I as a
Yeah.
teacher, how do we know whether he's teaching us the truth, or whether he's teaching us opinion?
That is a very good question.
Not really.
Although it is a good question, how do we know? We don't know unless we have certain understanding of criteria of what he should be before we learn from him.
No, but regardless of what he possesses,
Sometimes I'm not sure what's an interpretation either when I read it.
That's right. You see, the thing is this.
is not the original writing, it's an interpretation. It is also an interpretation.
Wait, I don't quite understand. Are you making a statement or asking a question? No, I didn't say that at all. I say, at the time that God told the Torah through Moses to the Jewish people, he explained to him, the Talmudic explanation. Moses was great enough to be able to retain that in his mind.
And they use
Oral tradition, and Joshua in turn and all the other great sages of that time were also great enough to retain this knowledge in their mind. Nowadays, unfortunately, we're very weak. Even we've got the book in front of us, we don't know what it is. But in those times, they had tremendous intellectual capacity. Unfortunately, as the generations went on, and as the Jewish people were more and more oppressed by the non-Jewish segment, they became increasingly more difficult to remember all the explanations. So they were forced by circumstance to start writing it down because otherwise it would be forgotten.
which does not address my original question. So that when it was remembered
That's right.
by Joshua and who the other two guys are,
All the way down. The Rambam, the Maimonides,
50 years later.
he records 40 generations from the time of Moses to the time of Ravashi, one of the last of the men that set up the Gomorrah as we have it today. And each person learned from each other first.
So that
there was
if I were to whisper something in your ear,
Yeah.
and you whispered in his, and he whispered in his, and it went out around the table, and then I repeated what the last man, it would have no semblance of what you heard originally, would it?
I appreciate that.
Would it?
No, but wait, I appreciate that. Fortunately, it has been written down for thousands of years.
That's not my question.
At the time, at the men that they wrote it, they didn't whisper it, they talked it out, and they had the intellectual
You answered
memory.
my question about fallibility. Do they remember perfectly?
Yes,
They had perfect recall.
they had perfect recall because these men had the Holy Spirit.
They're different people. It's not the same people as you or me.
No, they were people that were able to communicate directly with God. For instance, the last of the prophets were the men that set up the Mishnayos, the men of the Great Assembly. Ezra HaSofer and Haggai, the last of the prophets, they set up the prayers in the order we have them today.
They were talking directly with God.
They were talking directly with God. So you got to check right there. And they lived approximately over 1,000 years after Moses. And they were still talking with God directly. And the people...
So we're talking something that's
Indeed, they started to put it down when they realized that, unfortunately, the caliber of people that they had in the prior generations were no longer continuing due to many reasons, persecution or whatever it was. And so they wrote it down, and we have learned it as it's been written down for all these years. And I myself have had the great honor and privilege of learning from great Talmud scholars, men that without question could learn tremendously. And thanks God, I have been able to learn, and I teach to others. I don't teach people something that's not in here. I wouldn't do that. I try to be as faithful to it as possible. It's written
I
down.
don't think that you're talking about the same thing that I am.
What are you talking about then?
I'm talking about you read 3 words which say, I believe this. Let's use that 3 words as an example. If
Well-
I say those 3 words, I believe this, without any emphasis on any of the 3 words, the meaning is quite clear that I believe this. But if I say, I believe this, I've changed the meaning. I believe this, and raise my voice, we've changed it again. If I believe this,
That's right.
I've changed it again. Now, you say those 3 words in teaching. How do I know, or any of the rest of the people who are not as learned as those who are teaching us,
Yeah.
that which of the 3 or half a dozen different ways that
The only
3
way-
words could be read?
You know, that's a very interesting question. The Gemara tells us in the Shabbos, there came a non-Jew to Hillel, who was one of the great sages we had in the past. And he said, I want you to teach me the Torah. So Hillel says, all right, I'll teach you. He says, this is Aleph, this is Gimel. The next day, he said what he called Aleph, he called it Gimel, and he called it different letters. He says, but you told me today is not what you told me yesterday. He says, that's true. He says, I want you to understand something. The only way you can learn from me is to accept what I teach you. If you wish, you can have reservations about it. If you become a person becomes knowledgeable enough, you will know in fact whether or not you have been taught correctly or not. I have, thanks God, learned the Talmud for 43 years. I have been a member of the faculty of Hebrew Talmud. I haven't graduated. I have my own school for the past 22 years. I have taught many men. Among them, some of my former students, one of them is a great rabbi, lives in Eretz Israel and in Jerusalem. He has written a summary on the entire Talmud. That's one of my former students. And I have other students I try to be as great a Yireh Shamayim, a God-fearing individual as I can, and I try to tell it as straight as I can. Of course, I'm only a human being. I appreciate that I am very vulnerable in the sense that I could, God forbid, make mistakes. But I don't rely on my own judgment. I learned from the great sages that are written in these forms, and I explain it according to the way they explain it. For instance, when you learn Gemara, it is a truism. You go to a yeshiva. The rabbi explains the Gemara the way Rashi explains the Gemara. And if you learn enough years in the yeshiva, you realize all of a sudden that what the rabbi explained, and then later on what you learn in Rashi, is the identical thing. In other words, you find out by learning that in fact what the rabbi first explained orally, inside, is what Rashi in fact is saying. But it takes a little time, a little energy, and a little patience to get to that point of development. But I've had students here. People are here, they can testify this. For instance, I had my daughter. A little over a year ago, she couldn't read Hebrew. Now she can learn Gemara. Now, I'm not telling a lie. You can ask these gentlemen. They saw her develop right in front of their eyes. Isn't that correct? Isn't that right? She can learn the Gemara and she can explain it. Now, if you come regularly, you will also be able to do it if you apply yourself. I have no doubt whatsoever that you can do it. Matter of fact, I have no doubt anybody at this table can do it. It's just a simple question of application. Once you become knowledgeable, you will in fact realize that what I'm teaching you is not my personal opinion, but the opinion of these great sages. That
I'm not questioning you or your ability.
No,
I'm talking about these other men. She was 3,000 years after Moses, or 3,500 years after Moses.
But Rashi takes everything he takes is from the Medrash. He doesn't say anything by himself, and whatever he says, he has backing.
Well, why would you quote him instead of the original source? I don't understand.
I quote him because he had the God-given gift of explaining things concisely without talking too much.
Yeah, but
sometimes when you explain something, you talk too much about it, the student...
The one who said that is something that most people do not understand. And his entire concept was metaphysical.
Not necessarily.
Because fundamentally,
No,
all right?
I wouldn't make that judgment at all. I found Rashi over the years to be very, very reliable, and he never
I
just...
didn't say he was unreliable.
No, very reliable. I've learned from him. I've learned from him for all these years, and I've never found that Rashi is not dependable. I appreciate the fact that you can find other great authorities
I
that
don't
are...
think you're talking about the same thing I am. I didn't say he was undependable. I said in his opinion, he made the statement that metaphysics, which is the basic concept of all religious thinking.
There again, I don't know. I am not acquainted with the terminology metaphysics. I cannot go on
It's a
the comment.
philosophical word that should be quite...
Well, I'm sorry. I am not acquainted with that word. If you'll talk in simpler terms,
I can't give you better than dictionary definition.
No.
Of things which are not common to the mind, to the physical world, and are above and beyond the physical world and deal articles of faith.
Article of faith, there are some things that we base, well, whatever it is, the fact is, I hesitate to talk in terminology that I am not, I don't learn these. I learn simple English, but I do explain it as best I can in the light of these authorities.
You assume that I'm criticizing you.
No, but I'm not interested in necessarily pretending that I am an authority in my own way. I don't say that. When I say something, I have a backing of an earlier sage that, in fact, is an authority. I myself have never made that claim that I am myself an authority.
And that's what Rashi did.
The Rashi, in turn, also quotes from earlier sources.
And that's what the
Earlier sources, that's what they quote until they come to a source of a fundamental... but all of these we utilize, and they all emphasize them. You have any major university, and they have an economics course, say Economics 101, and they say they have 20 instructors in the course. And you go in each one of their classrooms, you'll see that they have to cover basically the same material, because at the end, there is a standard test given to all the students in the university that are taking that course. But if you'll notice, if you come there, you have the time, you go in there, you'll see each individual instructor teaches a little slightly different, each one from the other, depending on his capacity and also on the capacity of the students that he's learning with. Some students you have are very intellectually gifted, and you just have to say, you don't have to say too much, and they grasp the concept. Others never, you have to work on it before they really get even the simplest understanding. In the same way, we have many authorities explaining a concept in the... One explains it in one way, depending on where he's coming from, the other explaining it another way. It doesn't mean to imply that they're necessarily arguing. They're discussing different aspects of the same question. It requires a certain amount of scholarship to get to the point that you can distinguish between arguing and, in fact, discussing the different aspects of the same question. You have to go, it takes years of study before you get to that degree of understanding. And this is what the Gemara talks about and discusses. And I would suggest that if you have the time and you can come on a steady basis, hopefully it will become more and more discernible to you that in fact this is the case. And I am not saying that there are not disputes among the authorities. In the Talmud you'll find different opinions. Like for instance, we just discussed now, just before you came here, whether or not, if you had your tefillin on Mincha, whether or not you can keep it on even after the sunset. And we have a dispute in the Gemara. One authority, Rabbi Akiva, says that you can keep it on all night. It's perfectly all right. Another authority disagrees with Rabbi Akiva. And we're talking about men that contributed to me. We're not talking about, they were the actual, when I say they contributed, they were heads of theological college. I want to learn a commission on Daf Yud. We had a Shiloh came up. But Tzal, unfortunately, has a commission where he very difficult for him to go to sleep because there's a breathing problem. So many times he sleeps over Shabbat. So as a result, he has to come here from Mincha and put on tefillin. We've already had the shadow about that. We've already seen the Sakalocha, like the Mishnah Berurah, that even it's okay to have the tefillin on, and you still become the mitzvah of putting on tefillin. So we came this afternoon to the shir, and carrying so many sporim and everything else, Tzara forgot his tefillin, and he hasn't put them on today. So he's having a lot of tsar.
That's this morning.
Right now, just a little while ago. He was having a lot of tsar, and I wanted to placate him and say that you shouldn't have tsar. First of all, perhaps there are some tefillin here in the shul you can use. And then he still sits very unhappy about it. So I'm Yashiv, okay, I'll take you home. I said, but even if you didn't have the tefillin on, if you're learning Torah, it's like putting on. That's what I told him. And came out that Moshe and Himalay was coming here, so we brought him back. But now I want to go and testify my words.
Yeah.
Because I don't want you to think that I'm misleading.
I'm not accepting it just like that.
I don't. Well, I know this from past experience that everything I say has to
You
be.
have to walk like on eggs.
I appreciate that, bro. This is good trading. After 120 years, you come home and you go in the Gemara. So you're giving me it'll be easier to
Absolutely.
take later on. Learning Torah is like putting on tefillin. I could direct your attention to Rosh Hashanah. Okay?
How come?
What? How come what?
I opened it up.
Listen, kids, you're with it. Okay, let's face it. If you can open up to the proper dot just like that, let's face it, kid. You're no longer with the little boys already. You're getting up. I never question it. The Molly Rachamim, as he always is, and he makes our way easier.
Yeah.
This is a message.
Sure.
It's a message from God. He wants you to learn.
You need the page?
Becoming an expert too, you can show other people how to do it.
Thank you.
Where the big print is, Hoshi Israel Mekufon Maininu. Hoshi Israel Maininu. It's about 4 lines in the Shas Gemara, in the middle of the word. Hoshi Israel Mekufon Maininu.
I can't find it.
Broadens out.
The first broadening out?
Yeah, the first broadening out, about 4 or 5 lines from the broadening out period.
Oh, yeah.
Hoshi Israel. You have it?
Nope.
You're getting it there. You're almost there. Right there. Is that it?
Yeah. Poshe Yisrael for Gufan.
You understand, an intentional sinner of Israel with their body, what is that? What do we mean when a Jew is an intentional sinner with his body? Omar Rav says, Karkonach feeling. Rav says, the Gemara says here, Karkonach feeling. He's the type that didn't put on feeling. This is a person that's considered a Gufan. He's a sinner of Israel in his body. Almost all on the Gufan, Goyim, unfortunately, when they are intentional sinners with their body, they're sinning with the Avera. The word Avera usually implies snooze, immorality, yes. You must understand, first I'll learn you about the Tesis, and then we'll go to the Rosh. The Tesis, Karkafto de lo Monach feeling. You have that, the fourth Tesis on Yud Zayin Aleph. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tesis, the
Outer column where?
The lo Monach feeling. You have it?
This one?
That's right. The Bali Tesis says if a person engages in learning Torah, it's like to put on film.
So if someone is somewhere and they can't put on film,
It's something, a chiddush, you're learning. Right? I didn't make it up. I am for everything, bro.
You're Zion.
That feeling. You're learning your concept of the mitzvah of tefillah.
what if someone's
But
learning?
that's what happened.
No, we're talking about this. We're talking about a situation. Obviously, we don't have it available. Obviously, if you have tefillah available.
Didn't have a chance for a film, and then once they do though, but you're so engrossed in Torah, they learn for the night, they didn't even notice time passed.
No, and it's not here. You have the answer. I just want to show you where it is. I didn't want you to think I just took it out of the blue, and I was just trying to pacify you, Mr. Aleo, and saying, oh, it's the same thing. I didn't want you to think, Chalil Chas, that I was misleading you. Rabbeinu Tam before it, Rabbeinu Tam explains, the hook When is a person considered Poshi Sobrufo? When is a person considered Jew is considered an intentional sinner with his body? When the reason he doesn't put on the tefillin is not because he just doesn't put it on, there's a reason for it. He puts it on because he holds it with contempt, that mitzvah.
You mean it's just not because he acts in his...
No, not just, he holds
Because he
the
doesn't
mitzvah
want
with
to?
contempt. No. There are legitimate reasons why a person doesn't
You
put on
mean,
tefillin.
you mean it's because he doesn't want to intentionally because...
And because he holds that the mitzvah of tefillin is with contempt. Incidentally, we'll learn, as we'll learn when we learn the Rina Osher. You don't mind if we learn this, do you? Torah. When we learn Rina Osher, we'll see that in fact this could apply actually, there's a maforish there, that it applies to any mitzvah. If you don't do the mitzvah, it's not necessarily improper if you have a proper reason why you don't do the mitzvah. For instance, we have a mitzvah, for instance, you have to milah. Circumcision is one of the wonderful, studied mitzvahs, one of the most important of the mitzvahs. And yet, if a person has close male relatives that died of being circumcised, and that person doesn't circumcise because he's fearful that he might die, or his own health is very that's involved, the Gemara calls him a very good Jew. If otherwise, he is in every way observing the mitzvah. So it is not because he has hate. For some legitimate reason, he's not doing it. And that you must always understand, and this is a truism, that it's not whether you do the mitzvah or not, it's why you're not doing the mitzvah. Yes.
We talk about a custom of Israel when you do it, but they don't do it.
Yeah.
Is that considered holy task?
No. We have Baruch Hashem.
But what is
in
considered a
America, we have Jews that have come from all over the world.
They
All kinds of minhagim. And here is Shmuel, for instance. His mother was a Hungarian Jewess, and his father was a Persian Jew. So he's got all kinds
Quite
of
different.
minhagim all over the place.
Quite different.
So it doesn't make him a sinner if he doesn't follow the minhagim of the Jews in Tunisia or the Jews in France. There are different minhagim. That we should go. You fall on a Jew and you say, "Look, you're not doing all the things that everybody else does. Who can do everything?" You go mishugget. One says this thing, one says another thing. You follow the minhagim that you're accustomed to. Yes.
And also we learn that a woman's husband, because she's not allowed to go down, she's only allowed to go up in terms of things. How about if she has more minhagim than her husband do? What then? Does she retain them and he takes them because, or he's not, doesn't have to go up?
It depends. We have to discuss it on an individual basis.
But
I
is it
don't want to make it a
considered-
general
is
rule.
it considered-
Ordinarily, a Jewish woman has a Leo with her marriage and not a Yerido. But we have to
What
discuss-
about, on her question, if one of the,
If she doesn't,
not if it interferes with her responsibilities.
hard on her. Let's say there's some minhagim that takes physical.
There are
abilities.
that's why I suggest it has to be discussed on an individual basis. You cannot just make general rules because obviously sometimes a person cannot follow certain minhagim because they're not trained to do it. Yes.
normally the convert would agree or accept whatever the non-convert, meaning the Jew or Jewess, will say is what they should do, correct?
Well,
and that becomes an aliyah for him.
Wait.
You understand the problem?
Wait.
Does it make a difference if the convert is a male or a female?
Obviously, but
That I don't know.
Yeah,
Okay, wait. Wait, I don't understand why there has to be a big deal with minhagim. If somebody doesn't have some minhagim are unnecessary. It's not a necessity to have a minhag. You don't have to.
The light
You don't have to
of-
have a minhag on everything. Why can't you? Sometimes it's not. Why should somebody take upon the minhagim that they can't follow if it's not necessary?
I've
Take a
always
minhag.
been of the opinion that a person in our day and age, where we have so many different,
Is there any?
you can get to mischief if you try to assume too many of them. You are defeating the purpose of a minhag. A minhag is intended to fortify your attachment to Yiddishkeit. But if you go and adopt too many that you are not spiritually ready to assume, you can drive yourself to
Take
minhag,
away
it's not
from the
necessary.
effort for a
He has
minhag,
no
put the
tradition,
minhagim around it.
if it's a he.
Well, certain things you have to have a minhag.
Well,
So,
I would
he's got to be
postulate like
guided
this.
by
I would
some of
in our time and age where there are a lot of Bali Tshuva,
Yeah.
people that are trying to learn and trying to come back from I would suggest that we should not force a minhag on a person until they're ready to assume that minhag with continuing
Regularity and observance.
Each person has to make his own husband, his own theory, assuming that they are sincere and their desire.
If something is not a halacha, okay, we're not talking a halacha, but if something is not a halacha, why does even somebody who's about tshuva or somebody who's a ger have to accept something upon himself even later on in life when he's able to assume so say
If he feels in his own mind that he wants to identify with the Jewish community that he is living with, he will mamela assume these minhagim. We don't have to go and insist upon it. It will occur by natural attrition. If, for instance, you come to a shul, if you come to a shul, and everybody there says a little feeling before they daven. Now, some people are not acclimatized to say feeling. It's a mitzvah, besides the minhag, it's a mitzvah.
Yeah.
Say feeling. Nothing
But
wrong
it's
with
not
saying
terrible
feeling.
if they don't.
No, not terrible thing. If a person
It's nice
prefers,
to do.
a person instead of saying feeling to learn about Gomorrah,
That's all right.
He's not a sinner.
No,
He's not.
I was called that.
It's-
They were saying Tehillim one time in Shabbos between
Imagine
mincha,
that.
And
and,
you
I was
sorry.
learning with somebody else yet. I was learning
Yeah,
not only by
sorry.
myself. No, not you.
I know it had to be, no,
With
I'm
somebody
sure
else.
it wasn't a
But I was
Hasidic
learning, and somebody
shtut,
I
in
was
a
like-
place, it was a Hasidic shtut.
No.
But that's what I would expect.
somebody
Because
told me it was
Hasidim are in the
proper.
custom of
I-
saying,
You can't just go around, just like it says here. If Osik Batorah, Kumaniach feeling domin, Omar Basilto, Osik Potter minat feeling. That means you're engaged in one meritorious act,
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
potter from another. So, in other words, Talmud Torah is so great
so great, yeah.
that it, in fact,
Can
comforts
overrule.
you for this particular tremendous mitzvah. I'm not saying this is a small thing. So, similarly, first raise your hand.
And when it's talking about the Talmud Torah,
Get cool off.
If we don't
Get
get
these
it,
I have the opposite.
I would, what?
I'm sorry. I just want to show you this Gemara here, and it's the opposite actually to this one. But it's,
What is it?
Opposite to what we just learned?
no, not opposite, but
Well, this is one of the small Masechtas.
Yeah.
And
once I can finish.
The back of Rabbi Zor, small Masechtas.
Yeah.
Here's a small Masechta that it says here. Which Rabbi Lazar is Rabbi Lazar Omer. Oh yeah. Dola he mitzvah feeling. He sabo yom alayim learn their day and night. That's converted.
Yeah.
Master of the world. The key honor yom alayim. We go and learn really day and night. Literally all day and all
Continuously,
night.
yeah.
Omar lahem akorcho beneath. Put feeling on your head, seichem, and on your arms, and I will give you credit as though you were learning Torah day and night. Zikron b'nei necho, in order the Torah of God should be in your mouth. In your mouth. What are you trying to
so I'm
say?
saying it's a compliment to if you're learning Torah, then you're plus from tefillin, and by putting on tefillin, you're also getting credit for learning
As if
Torah.
you learn
as if you're
Torah
learning
day and
night.
night.
I understand, but this is contradict this statement here.
Contradict. I said it's like the compliment.
It's like the reverse of our...
Can I answer?
Oh, you asked
Are we still on the subject? Wait a minute.
Wait.
Have you exhausted your questions
No,
on the
I'm
subject?
sorry. The question I have is, does it apply to women in terms of, if we're going to say that it was born out of his person, not me?
Ominous person, because the first
Was both
Adam
male and female.
that said the Gemara says about praise God was called Yehuda.
Applies to people, and it says, and it lists these things, and then it says Torah connected to whom. I would imagine that applies equally.
A woman is obligated on certain mitzvahs, and obviously she has to become knowledgeable on those mitzvahs.
And since a woman is only really taught from a very small fraction of the mitzvahs, I would imagine that it will really...
B'zmanenu, in our time, when unfortunately we are living in a tremendously secular society, it is a tremendous responsibility for every Jewish person, whether female as well as male, become knowledgeable in God's Torah and continually review the halachas that have a shaykhah, their responsibilities, because we cannot survive in this such a hostile atmosphere unless everybody is learning on a constant level. It's true in years gone by when the Jews lived in conclaves and they were sheltered from the outside world. that perhaps the Jewish women could, in the main, not engage in learning in yeshivas because of the fact that they were living in the Torah, and our time no longer applies. And we have the affirmative obligation for all Jewish people to become knowledgeable in God's Torah and continually learn as much as they are capable of learning. Yes.
I'm not sure exactly what she said, but did you say that a woman should also, it goes also for a woman that applies... Talmud. Okay, my shaila is, in the Torah, I learned that by a woman, she does not get schar like a man gets schar for learning.
Wait a minute.
Wait, a woman gets schar in many areas.
But not like a man gets schar.
That's true, but she gets schar in a different way.
She's any mitzvah.
Oh, but she gets schar, for instance, she gets schar for learning, number one. She's not like non-Jew. She gets schar for learning, number one. She gets schar if she causes her husband to learn.
Yeah.
And her children to learn.
She shares in that.
She shares in that. She's got a lot of things going for her.
No, I'm not arguing with that. I'm just saying, if she said Talmud Torah can I get kulam, does that apply also to a woman?
Then why would
And I am saying that she's Eina Mitzvah on Torah.
Ladies,
Shiloh, on your Shiloh.
I am trying to say to you.
This is the same thing. I know she's getting a word. I'm not saying
We learn.
I got a Shiloh. It also says a woman does not get the same award as a man. It seems to say that Talmud Torah connected kulam for a man, whereas Talmud Torah is not quite kulam for a woman.
No, it's not so.
I have a
No, I would learn Pshat like this.
I got a different...
For instance, keep it over here.
Yeah.
Is the woman obligated to understand?
Yes, absolutely.
But yes, the Gemara says, discusses about each relations to Yira. It just mentions each, although the Gemara learns off Pshat that he wrote Lashon Rabbi.
That's by keep it out the end.
That's by Yiras always.
Well, keep it out the end. Okay, so my shaila is though, but Talmud Torah is greater than keep it out the end.
I'm not disputing that.
So I'm saying there are two different classifications. You can't learn one from, I don't think you can
Why?
I'm
learn
not
the other.
disputing, but the fact is this.
Because if you learn Torah, you're a partner from keep it out the end.
Okay, then yes.
She's not obligated in learning Torah.
But
a
she,
whole different... I got to consider...
Different opinion.
The fact that Kibbutz Talmud Torah Keneged, you won't receive as much schar as a man would, should make no difference to your attitude of learning Torah. For the reason that if you say to Hashem, I'm not looking for the schar, so I'll get less than my husband. It don't matter to me. I want to learn the Torah l'shem shemayim. That's even bigger than your husband could get.
Unless her husband's a
The truth is, we're not going to box any Jew out, Jew, female or male, from... No,
See, women have learned. It's not that important that they got to learn. The husband has got to learn. So why? Because they won't get...
I'm
But
telling you, it's just
it should be the other way.
for a woman to learn
Absolutely.
as knowledge. We have no room for complacency.
For ignorance.
But that's not an argument. Hold on. The question is, it's a principle of Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. Now, wait, let me finish. Wait, can I finish?
it doesn't say a woman.
It's your wife you're arguing with.
A woman.
I have a
it
list.
What?
doesn't say for people up until after that.
No, I agree with your position that the Talmud Torah Keneged applies to every Jew that's in that territory.
Wait, my question is, but if they're partner from, what I say, can I please?
Well, you can, but
Okay, look.
Go ahead.
Time, we're fighting the clock. Come on.
Go ahead.
Break the... No, anyway, if Talmud Torah, okay, let me go through one thing. Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. Now, if that applies to a woman who is not mitzvah, in learning Torah, that should, okay, I state that should not be in effect for a woman who's not mitzvah learning. I'm not saying that a woman's learning is not important. It is of the highest importance.
Go on, Amy.
However, since the man is the one who is mitzvah on it, and he's the one who has the Yetzer Hara, who will go against him to stop him.
He doesn't be able to answer right.
Not in the same...
Not in the same way, because if somebody's commanded,
I'm listening.
if somebody's commanded to do something, therefore he has the Yetzer Hara who says don't do it. Whereas a woman who's not commanded does not have the Yetzer Hara saying
They
don't
have
do
the
it.
Yitzhak, don't do what you're not doing.
Since he has to go and defeat the Yetzer Hara and try to fight the Yetzer Hara, he should have Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. Whereas a woman who doesn't have that should not have Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam.
I disagree with you in the sense that this is the thing. A woman that is Mesiris Nefesh is prepared to be serious, not tieflos, not learning it as a superficial learning, but a serious application to learning the Rabbinic Torah I see no reason in the world why she should be boxed out of this truism of Talmud Torah connected.
Wait, I got on this totally. Because, okay, if a woman learns for tiflis, she's forbidden. She can't even learn Torah tiflis. That's when it says a man is forbidden to teach. The only time a person can, not obligated, but can teach his daughter Torah is if it's not for tiflis, if she's serious.
Yeah.
Therefore, that is the lowest, that tiflis, you can't do it at all. It's not even a shallow, you can't do it at all.
Why should you diminish, in any sense of the word, anybody
I'm not diminishing.
teacher?
I want to understand.
I cannot understand how we can learn Pshat other than Pshat to make that the Rabbi Shalom is Moli Rachamim, and Rabbi Shalom will maximize everybody's efforts to the greatest degree. And I think that's the way, it is the preferable way to learn Pshat.
I realize that Moshe is saying that the lowest level, it is in effect saying that the lowest and the highest level is the same level for a woman learning, that she cannot learn unless she's serious, and once she learns, the only time she can learn is when she's serious, so that seems to be it. One level for women learning.
I
disagree.
disagree.
There's difference between serious and serious.
That's right. There's degrees.
As long as it's not tiflis.
Yeah, that's right.
And
there
that can be
different
noticed
gradations
easily.
of seriousness.
Yeah.
A person can be serious to the limit degree, or a person can be serious on a maximized full application as much as a person can do. I do not wish to learn Pshat that boxes any Jew out from maximum benefit.
That's the one who's going to decide it anyway.
No, based on whatever I've learned in the Torah, and I've learned very little, I admit. But unfortunately, I've learned more than you sitting at the table, which is it makes me to desire to learn more. Based on what I've learned,
Unfortunately,
the chesed of God is beyond comprehension, and the reward God gives to a person, the God gives to.
I can't answer some of my questions.
I know.
No, my problem is that many of my thinking and thoughts are regarding on this very subject.
Yeah.
We have 613 mitzvahs in the Torah.
Correct.
Every man and every woman who is Jewish has a Yiddish neshama. It's a different kind of neshama that the Goyim have.
Right.
And these neshamas have to observe the mitzvahs. By doing that, they are clinging to God in the observance of mitzvahs.
Okay.
So the kasha comes to my mind, which I don't expect you to answer because I don't think you have delved into Chassidus and Kabbalah, which would be able to answer my question, that even a woman who has a neshama and is putter, so to speak, from learning Torah, she doesn't have to in comparison with the man, she has certain mitzvahs she has to do. And the man has certain mitzvahs he has to do. And since there's 613 mitzvahs in the Torah, some of them are applicable to a man, some to a woman, some to a Kohen, some to a Levi, I presume,
Yes.
some to living in Eretz Yisrael.
Yes.
So therefore, we, each of us, with our neshama, is really a neshama that must have been here previously as a Kohen, or living in Eretz Yisrael, or something, and we're here now because we're now given the opportunity to do the mitzvahs that we find ourselves needing to do as a man or as a woman. So my object, you understand the point I'm trying to make?
You're going to sheet of the Lubavitcher Rebbe that you're talking about, that everybody is Gilgal. If that's so, that's so.
If that's so,
it may not.
how can a neshama do the 613 mitzvahs?
Rabbinism, they're not arbitrary.
There's some that are limited in certain conditions,
But you listen, no.
and it can't live as a
It
Kohen.
is the truism that every person has an equal opportunity to serve God.
Absolutely, no question.
And
whatever
it would be a contradiction in terminology for us to postulate a pshat that would imply that a woman somehow is boxed out of the same of coming to God as a man. In her way, she can come to God as close as any man.
Because then we would be saying that the
I don't want to
Neshama...
learn that way.
True.
I will learn
It doesn't have gender because
it
to live on
says Talmud Torah connected to home applies both to man and woman. That's
Wait a
why
minute, but Talmud Torah is what a man is obligated in. Talmud Torah, a woman is not
a
obligated.
woman is obligated in the areas of influencing her husband to learn, her
That's
children
not
to learn.
Torah. That she's influencing
That
them to
is,
learn Talmud
I
Torah.
understand it that way.
I have another-
If a woman works so that her husband can learn all day, she's a partner just like in soccer and schooling.
You know,
She gets a full share equal to what the husband learns.
That if a person supports somebody that's learning Torah, to
That's only
paskin,
for women's marriage, but that's
he
only for
would- he
women's
would- well, today we'll discuss, we had a shot, has been putting on tefillin for Mincha, and Mr. Samuel thought to the fence at that, because sometimes it has it on even a little time after actual Shkia Satamo, the sun setting, when the time is the sunset.
Time that you can go
That's
to.
what we're going to learn right now. He tells us like this, in Orach Chaim, and Siman Lamed, that's the 30th chapter, the time that you can put on tefillin, and on the second section, the second paragraph says, also it's prohibited to put on tefillin in the nighttime. Perhaps you might forget that you have the sleep with them. If you put them on before the sun set, and it came dark, they're all even if they are on him all the night. Mutter, it's permissible, main morin came, but we don't teach it that way. The imlo cholat feeling, if he didn't take off his tefillin when the sun set, because he had no place to watch it, and he kept him on him in order to watch him. Mutter, it's permissible, morin came, we can teach that to be so. You should understand like this. The Balei Tesvis and the Rosh, like Rabbi Akiva, because Ravashi, who was the last of the Amoraim, who set up the Gemara the way we have today, he was the last of them. The law is like Rashi, Paskin like Rabbi Akiva, who says in the Gemara that, I know this sounds strange, that nighttime is also a time for putting on tefillin.
But you just said that it wasn't.
I know. The halacha is, we take in consideration, the Ram disagrees, he feels that it's not the proper time to put on tefillin. So the Orach HaShulchan tells us that as far as the Torah law is concerned, nighttime is also a time for putting on tefillin. But the Rabbanan made a decree against it so that we shouldn't put it on at nighttime. Now, question. At the time he put it on, whether or not it's permissible.
Wait, did
So we
he
say-
put it on during Mincha?
He put it during Mincha.
But not during Mara.
Now, it says like this, the deer in the Mishnah Brura says like this, if he does not take off his tefillin when the sun sets, we're talking about that case. So Lomar, what are we talking about when the sun sets? The Marshkia, we're talking about the end of the setting of the sun. That is the going out of the stars. In other words, according to the Mishnah Brura, you have all the way up to the time when the stars appear. That means, on Tzesek V'Chovim, is the time you would wait before you would daven going out from Shabbat. And
What about?
so, therefore, under no circumstances have we ever had his tefillin on that late. So there was never any shaila that he was permitted to put on the tefillin, even at that late time. If he hadn't put them on sooner, of course. Obviously, the proper time to put on tefillin is when in the morning.
But another question.
But if you missed for some reason, like on Tisha B'Av we have we don't put on tefillin in the morning, so we do it in the afternoon. And we do it every year. It's not just one person. The all Klal Yisrael does it.
This brings up another question to me, in that if even though you're saying that it's okay that he does
No, I
the
haven't
tefillin,
finished it. I haven't finished it. Yeah,
but then if there's someone in the synagogue that is like objectionable to it, does that mean that this doesn't that subtract from it then that you can't?
No.
Because then he feels.
no. There is no reason to object for somebody doing something that's permissible according to the law. Why should a person object to a person putting on tefillin? I never heard of such a thing in my life. I can understand you can object to a person doing an Aveira, But putting on tefillin, there's no objection within the time that's permitted. There's no reason why a person should object. If some people are not accustomed to seeing tefillin put on in the afternoon, they should know that the law permits them to do it. Simple as that. And just because you're not accustomed to it, what's the...
It's your sister. He comes unless you do maybe the same from
All right, let's go further. I'll read you the variable. He wants to say, if you haven't taken off the tefillin, all off of the Mishnah Berurah, if you haven't taken off tefillin when the sun sets, he wants to say that means the end of the setting of the sun, that means the going out of the stars. Then it's the time from taking off the tefillin as far as the law is concerned. Because if it was during twilight, even if he had a place to watch it, he does not have to take it out. And this appears in the Gemara and Menachos, and even according to the authority that says night is not the time for putting on tefillin, he admits that's okay. So even the authority that holds that night is not the time for putting on tefillin, he permits you to keep on the tefillin all the way up to Tzeitzek HaChavim. In other words, if a person puts on tefillin on Mincha, as long as he takes it off before the stars come out, which is the time that we would daven ordinarily Mitzui Shabbos, going out on Shabbos, not on during the weekdays, that's a long time afterwards. He's perfectly all right. There's no law that says he has to take. He does. And Koshkin, certainly, what he's done according to us, that we poskin that as far as the Torah law is concerned, even if you had tefillin on at night, it would still be all right. Although the first thing is you're supposed to do it.
Would it be considered a sin if you put it on after the stars?
And the Prima Godding said that we poskin like that in the first instance. What? Ordinarily, were you supposed to come here? We're going to discuss. You didn't come. I expect you to come. Oh, I'm sorry. How do you feel today? Feel better?
No.
Never. Oh, please don't be that.
Thank you.
All right. So you understand? So we discussed it here. So the halacha is quite like there. So Mr. Samuel, you should not have gotten that excited.
I understand
But,
because you...
No, I understand he didn't want you to adopt in an improper time.
Also, you didn't want me to say...
He says specifically, according to all authorities, it's perfectly legitimate. If he puts on tefillin, if he didn't put it on before that, then obviously the best time to put on tefillin is in the morning. But for some reason, for instance, sometimes you don't have your tefillin available. That happens. Or sometimes you're sick. You can't get up in the morning. There's other reasons. You don't have the tefillin. So you put on tefillin at night and the time. And you can keep it on as long as it has not come Tzeitzek HaChavim. Okay? I just wanted to clarify that before we discussed anything further. Now, today we're discussing about the Sedra.
Maybe this gentleman has some questions.
Or did you want to discuss anything there? I can discuss whatever you wanted to discuss if you have any difficulty. No, we have, you see, must understand something. Every passage, every pasuk, every verse in the Tanakh, what we call the Old Testament, is not to be interpreted necessarily literally. The Talmud and the Talmudic literature explain what every passage means. In other words, if we want to know what it means, we have to go to the Torah Shebaal Peh, which we call the oral Torah, which is now, of course, written down too. The Talmud and Talmudic literature, and that explains what everything means. Yes, of course.
Is it a tenet, Jewish belief, that man is fallible or infallible?
Oh boy, you got to go try it. Tell me what you mean in simpler English. What do you mean by fallible?
Makes mistakes.
That man makes mistakes? Man is capable of making mistakes, yes.
Not capable, not kappa. He either does not make mistakes or he does make mistakes.
He has the potential of making mistakes.
But he doesn't do it.
Oh, I didn't say he doesn't. Most people do make mistakes.
No, yes I do and no I don't.
No, I don't quite understand what you're saying. Are you trying to say that nobody makes mistakes?
No, I'm trying to ask, as a tenet of the faith,
Yeah.
is it a belief that man makes mistakes? Or is that man does not make mistakes?
Well,
Either he does or he don't.
It isn't that isn't that the thing. It is a belief that most people make mistakes.
But there are some who do not.
There are very few that don't.
How do we distinguish who those people are?
Very simple. And that enumerates 4 people that did not make mistakes. But that obviously there were more than 4 people have lived. And so most of us do make mistakes, unfortunately.
Only those 4 people.
And those are the only ones enumerated in the Talmud. Perhaps others
Well,
also.
how would we distinguish, for example, you as a teacher, or I as a
Yeah.
teacher,
Yeah.
how do we know whether he's teaching us truth, or whether he's teaching us opinion?
That is a very good question.
Not really.
Although it is a good question, how do we know? We don't know unless we have certain understanding of criteria of what he should be possessing before we learn from him.
No, but regardless of what he possesses,
Sometimes I'm not sure what's an interpretation either.
That's right. You see, the thing is this.
what I'm saying is that book is not the original writing, it's an interpretation. The Mishnah is also an interpretation.
I don't quite understand. Are you making a statement
time
or
has
asking?
the original,
No, I didn't say that at all.
or
I say,
right.
at the time that God told the Torah through Moses to the Jewish people, he explained to him, the Talmudic explanation. Moses was great enough to be able to retain that in his mind.
And they use
Oral tradition, and Joshua in turn and all the other great sages of that time were also great enough to retain this knowledge in their mind. Nowadays, unfortunately, we're very weak. Even we've got the book in front of us, we don't know what it means. But in those times, they had tremendous intellectual capacity. As the generations went on, and as the Jewish people were more and more oppressed by the non-Jewish segment, they became increasingly more difficult to remember all the explanations. So they were forced by circumstance to start writing it down because otherwise it would be forgotten.
That's my original question. When it was remembered
That's right.
by Moses, and Joshua, and who the other 2 guys are?
All the way down. The Rambam, the Maimonides, he records 40 generations from the time of Moses to the time of Ravashi, one of the last of the men that set up the Gomorrah as we have it today. And each person learned from each other first.
If I were to whisper something in your ear,
Yeah.
and you whispered in his, and he whispered in his, and it went on around the table, and then I repeated what the last man told me, it would have no semblance of what you heard originally, would it?
I appreciate that.
Would it?
No, but wait, I appreciate that. Fortunately, it has been written down for thousands of years.
That's not my question.
At the
It's not-
time, at the men that they wrote it, they didn't whisper it, they talked it out, and they had the intellectual
You answered
remember.
my question about fallibility. Do they remember perfectly?
Yes,
They had perfect recall.
they had perfect recall because these men had the Holy Spirit.
They're different people. It's not the same people as you or me.
No, they were people that were able to communicate directly with God. For instance, the last of the prophets were the men that set up the Mishnayos, the men of the Great Assembly. Ezra and Haggai, the last of the prophets, they set up the prayers in the order we have today.
They were talking directly with
They were
God.
talking directly with God. You got to check right there. And they lived approximately over 1,000 years after Moses, and they were still talking with God directly. And the people,
So there, we're talking something in the region of 3,000 years ago.
indeed, they started to put it down when they realized that, unfortunately, the caliber of people that they had in the prior generations were no longer continuing due to many reasons, persecution or whatever it was. And so they wrote it down, and we have learned it as it's been written down for all these. And I myself have had the great honor and privilege of learning from great Talmud scholars, men that without question could learn tremendously. And thanks God, I have been able to learn, and I teach to others. I don't teach people something that's not in here. I wouldn't do that, God forbid. I try to be as faithful to the to it. It's possible.
I don't think that you're talking about the same thing that I am.
What are you talking about then?
Talking about, you read, believe this.